Thanks for tuning in to Wine Blast. Did you know that Wine Blast Plus now comes with exclusive discount benefits? Enjoy money off Jancis Robinson Glassware, Corravin and Academy du Vin Library. Sign up at wineblast.co.uk, where you'll also get early access to all episodes, plus our full archive, and enjoy exclusive subscriber-only content. Hello, this is Wine Blast. Whether you're a new listener, a regular listener, or a Wine Blast Plus subscriber, you are very welcome. And boy, do we have a tasty show for you today, because this is our New Zealand Wines of the Year, and it is stuffed full of treats.
Yes, hello, welcome. We're diving back into the glorious world of Kiwi wine, which is a relatively regular topic on the pod, but this time round as a Wines of the Year feature to allow us to really get down and dirty with what's going on in New Zealand wine right now. Here's a taster of what's coming up.
People often say, Marlborough's too reliant on Sauvignon Blanc, and I'm like, well, if that's the case, then Champagne's too reliant on Champagne.
We want to leave our little corner of the planet a better place than we found it.
So there we heard from Matt Sutherland of Dog Point and some chap called Sam Neill, who's actually very famous, of course, partly because of his outstanding work at Two Paddocks Wine,
yeah.
but also because of a bit of acting too.
Bit of acting.
So yes, we're not only featuring some stellar Kiwi wines on the show, we're also privileged to be hearing from some of the finest wine minds in the South Pacific.
Yeah. We've also got Matt Thompson of Blank Canvas, Ed Donaldson of Pegasus Bay, Helen Masters of Atarangi, and Kevin Judd of Grey Wacky. I mean, how's that for an all-star cast? I can't stop smiling. What a privilege. We should also at this stage say thank you to New Zealand Winegrowers for facilitating this initiative, also to the wineries for supporting. As ever though, our views and opinions and scores are entirely independent and unfiltered, as regular listeners will know very well by now, and as you'll find out in due course too.
Yep, no beating around the bush here. So I think we should probably recap on why we're focusing on New Zealand in this Wines of the Year format. And it's for two main reasons. One, we adore the wines because they're fresh, they're ridiculously drinkable and increasingly refined. But the other reason is perhaps the more interesting one, and it comes down to a certain concern about the future of New Zealand wine.
Exactly. It seems as if New Zealand is at a fork in the road in terms of its wine evolution. It's come so far in such a short space of time. It's unbelievable to think that the modern wine scene in New Zealand only really kicked into gear in, the 70s, 1970s, 1980s?
Yeah, I mean, when was the first Cloudy Bay Sauvignon Blanc? I think it was in 1985, wasn't it?
Exactly. And the first vines of the modern era were only planted in Marlborough in 1973, as we explored in our Marlborough 50 episode back in season 5. So it's come a long way in a very short time, barely 50 vintages. But it's almost as if that commercial success risks becoming an Achilles heel. Winemakers are really concerned that New Zealand wine is becoming dominated by a handful of big corporations flogging a pastiche of Kiwi Sauvignon Blanc with little regard to quality or integrity or indeed responsible land stewardship. And as a result, the really exciting, progressive, modern reality of New Zealand wine is in danger of being overshadowed or sort of, lost in the mix.
Yeah, and this situation is exacerbated by the evident headwinds affecting wine producers the world over right now. The cost of living crisis, changing demographics, shifting trends around wellness and alcohol consumption, the impact of tech, and governance issues like tariffs and taxes, all of which we've explored on the pod lately. But this is not the whole story. So what we want to do with this New Zealand Wines of the Year initiative is to get behind the headlines and the stereotypes and find out what's really going on.
Now, all you regular listeners will be familiar with our regional Wines of the Year format. We've done it with Chile the last couple of years. Essentially, after drawing up a pretty elite hit list, we call in a whole load of wines, about 215 bottles for this one, I think it was. So a pretty average Tuesday night for Susie, if we're really honest. So with these New Zealand wines, we then tasted them over an epic 3-day session. Not just tasting, but retasting and retasting, discussing, arguing, throwing things,
debating,
making up, tasting again, generally working things through.
And when the dust settled, we ended up with, I think it was just over 100 wines selected to be our wines of the year.
Yeah.
Now, just a point of detail, we mark each wine out of 100, and the minimum score to qualify as a Wattie was 93, which is pretty high. It's a pretty high standard. What's more, the top scoring wines and producers received special awards, which will be revealed as we go along.
So just quickly here, we did give the top award winners who we interviewed for this programme a tightly embargoed advance notification of these gongs. Here are a couple of those reactions from Sam Neill and Helen Masters.
I'm completely gobsmacked and delighted. That's really knocked my socks off. I cannot tell you how pleased I am with that.
Wow, they're the best results I've heard for a while. When you said I've got some results for you, I felt like I was at the doctor's there for a second. But these are amazing. Thank you.
Maybe we should give people their doctor's results at the same time. That would certainly make our awards even more exciting by comparison, wouldn't it?
It would be a whole new light show.
But actually, Matt Thompson made a serious point here that whereas wine shows tend to showcase what's mainstream, wine critics, like us, I guess, though we wouldn't necessarily use that term, tend to recognise individuality in the wines, which was absolutely our aim.
Yeah, it was, wasn't it? Now, of course, 100 plus wines are way more than we can mention in this programme. So we've compiled a full listing of our wines of the year in a report, which we're publishing on our website show notes in tandem with this show. It's actually a 50-odd page PDF you can download directly from our site for free with full tasting notes on every wine.
Not only that, but the report also includes recent vintage summaries, key stats and data, a proper map. You would not put your name, Peter Riches, to anything without a map, would you?
Yes.
Plus lots of opinion and talking points to keep it all as interesting and insightful and useful as possible. And yes, it's free to download, and we'll put a link in our show notes.
Talking of stats, a favourite topic. Must get
With
out
maps
more.
and
We know
stats.
this. Maps and stats. That is me. 29% of our wines of the year were Pinot Noirs. 25% were Sauvignon Blanc and 18% were Chardonnay. And on a regional basis, 53% of our wines of the year were from Marlborough. But for example, 41% of our Pinot Noir Watties, or wines of the year, were from Central Otago.
Okay, so hang on. I'm going to stop you there before we disappear down a stats rabbit hole.
No, I'm sad you stopped me there. I had so many stats up my sleeve.
I'm sure you did. Anyway, I think we should start by setting the scene and then maybe taking one talking point at a time, which will give a bit more colour to our results from the report, which we'll cover as we go along.
Okay, I'll put my spreadsheets away temporarily. They're here if we need them.
Excellent.
If anyone else
Lovely.
wants them.
Makes
So
us feel
I
better.
don't think we need to say too much by way of context, given we've covered this ground before on the pod. But why not start at the beginning, or a beginning? New Zealand is an island country in the southwestern Pacific Ocean, split into two main islands, north and south. It's known as Aotearoa, among other names, by its Maori population, descendants of Polynesians who settled the islands from the 13th century. Europeans then arrived from the 17th century onwards. Its population today is a little over 5 million.
Now, most of New Zealand's wine regions are on the eastern side of the islands, given the winds and weather tend to come in from the west. Wine makes up a significant part of New Zealand's international trade, along with the likes of dairy, meat, wood and fruit, with wine exports representing 90% of Kiwi wine sales at a value of over 2 billion New Zealand dollars. And the growth of that wine industry, as we said, has been fast. It's gone from 388 hectares of vines in 1960 to more than 42,000 hectares today.
Mind you, it still only makes about 1% of global wine, which you may find somewhat surprising given that New Zealand wine is pretty well known around the world. So why is it so well known? Well, right from the start of its modern era in the 70s and 80s, New Zealand has gamely set out its stall for making characterful, recognisable wines that have captured the zeitgeist. Punchy Sauvignon Blanc, tick. Elegant Pinot Noir, yes please. It's a formula that has caught the attention of wine lovers and enabled New Zealand to punch well above its weight.
But that, in a way, is where we'd like to dive in deeper, because this broad brush characterisation, as helpful as it is on a superficial level, also does New Zealand a disservice. So let's take a step back and let Kevin Judd set the scene. Kevin is co-owner with his wife Kimberly of Greywacke, an outstanding producer in Marlborough. Before that, he was head winemaker at Cloudy Bay for 25 years. The Greywacke wines achieved stellar results in our tasting, including the Top White Award. Here's how Kevin introduces New Zealand.
We just have this amazing climate in New Zealand where we get this intense sunlight, because we're at latitude 41.5 degrees south, which in the northern hemisphere is through the middle of Italy and Spain. So we get intense sunlight, but we don't get heat because we're on two little islands in the middle of the South Pacific and there is no landmass. So a hot day these days, we talk about 32 perhaps being a very hot day, and but pretty much every time we get a hot day, we get cool nights. It gets down to 15 degrees usually on a 30-degree day, so we just don't get heat. We have no landmass to collect heat.
So that intense sunlight, coupled with the maritime climate, naturally gives wines that are full of flavour, but also fresh in feel. And it's a winning combination, perhaps, I guess, most vividly expressed in the classic extrovert, in-your-face style of Marlborough Sauvignon Blanc that's become, globally famous.
Well, so let's home in on Sauvignon Blanc as a starting point then. This was a wine that naturally made a big splash when it first emerged onto the scene, simply because there was nothing else like it. With its explosion of exotic fruit, punchy flavours and lip-smacking acidity, it was kind of wine and entertainment all rolled up into one tasty, uplifting bundle. And it proved so successful that Sauvignon Blanc now accounts for more than 2/3 of New Zealand's wine vineyard and nearly 90% of New Zealand's wine exports by volume.
Astonishing figures, those. You should take a moment just to for
mad,
that to sink in. At the same time, though, New Zealand Sauvignon has matured in style. Back to Greywacke's Kevin Judd.
So we've got this amazing climate that gives us this incredible fruit. So we've got the raw material to make great wine, and intense wine, intensely fruity, very powerful wine. I mean, I guess the challenge for us at Greywacke is to manage that and to make. We actually try and turn the volume down a little bit with the Sauvignon Blanc, because you can sort of dial up how much intensity you want with how you grow the fruit and what you do in the winemaking process. But we're trying to make some Sauvignon Blanc that is really at the riper end of the spectrum. We don't chase styles, and we're using very neutral yeast. We don't try and add anything with the actual fermentation. So we're just working to maximise what the vineyard can give us in terms of ripeness and just beautiful texture.
Turning the volume down with Sauvignon Blanc. It's an interesting concept, isn't it? And that's definitely been a trend within Kiwi Sauvignon, hasn't it? Making deliberately less extrovert styles, still with the character and sort of classic New Zealand brightness, but majoring less on the obvious stuff and more on things like texture, elegance, minerality, or sort of flintiness, that kind of thing.
And Kevin was at pains to stress that much of that is to do with careful viticulture, getting things right in the vineyard. He harvests on the riper side, as he says, and isn't so keen on thiols, which are essentially aromatic compounds that smell like passion fruit, box hedge, or even cat's pee, which often come from the grape skins. Someone else I asked about Sauvignon was Matt Thompson, our winemaker of the year, a veteran of 66 vintages across 2 hemispheres, whose own brand is Blank Canvas with his wife and business partner Sophie Parker Thompson MW. So what's his secret for making great Sauvignon Blanc?
I think one of the keys is not to cut corners. So you need to harvest sensitively your site when it's at optimum ripeness. There are some who harvest by geography, which I think is a crime. You've got to get them ripe. You've got to get the yield right to do that. Not necessarily uber low yields, but you need to have the optimum yield. And the other thing which is crucial is don't have skin contact in Marlborough. You don't need it. And if you do use skin contact, either intentionally or because you cut corners, you end up with a wine that loses the life. It becomes phenolic and it ages fast. It loses freshness. So it's actually quite simple. Gentle and careful site selection.
So careful site selection, appropriate yields, optimum ripeness, and minimal skin contact. And what this allows, Matt went on to say, is the site to express itself. In short, we're talking serious wines. Kiwi Savvy 2.0. Now, some people say that Sauvignon Blanc is not a noble grape, that it's incapable of expressing terroir. But that's simply not true, as this tasting definitely proved. I asked Matt how important site expression is in Marlborough Sauvignon Blanc these days.
Oh, for me, it's huge, and I guess being a winemaking consultant, I've worked for multiple companies in Marlborough, very, very carefully managing conflict of interest, of course. But it's shown me so many different subversions, and some companies will have 100 plus tanks at the end of fermentation, all from different vineyards and subregions. Now, that gives you an incredible detailed insight into each harvest in the whole region. And it's frustrated me that we have this detail, but we've been so poor at transmitting that to the trade at large. So I see sommeliers think they need one Marlborough Sauvignon Blanc on their list. And I look at it and go, well, no wonder you're bored with the category, because I think you should have several. And I think if you have someone comes in and they say, I'd like a Marlborough Sauvignon Blanc, you then say, well, would you like a tropical style? That would be Dylan's point. Do you want a crunchy herbal style? That'd be Coastal Arbitrary. Do you want a kind of elderflower white currant? That'd be Conda's Bend or Rapora. So that diversity is huge, but we haven't told the story. And it's frustrating, because I think the trade, SOMs, they love to have those insights, because then they can help their consumers have better experiences. And we haven't given them that knowledge up until more recently. So it's a fantastic time. I'm enjoying telling the story as well.
It's true. There are so many different styles of Marlborough Sauvignon Blanc these days, aren't there? So much so, it's kind of hard to talk about the overall category without feeling you're generalising. Part of that is different terroirs emerging, like Awatere or Dylan's Point or Wide Row. But it's also about the winemaking intent, isn't it?
Yeah, and there are an increasing number of what we might term new wave Sauvignon styles. I mean, producers often use the term alternative styles. And Matt talks about adopting practices like whole bunch pressing, ambient yeast ferments with cloudy juice, lees aging, often in oak, all that kind of stuff. And that's making for not only much more diversity in the New Zealand Sauvignon scene, it's also making for some really delicious wines.
Yeah, I want to bring in Matt Sutherland of Dog Point here, which carried off our top Sauvignon award for their straight Sauvignon Blanc. Now, Dog Point also make a wine called Section 94, which is a really complex oak-aged style of Sauvignon. And I asked him to talk us through the wine.
Well, Section is, I guess, a single vineyard in the site, and was planted in 1992. So that's going off on a completely different tangent, that wine. And it's very much driven by that vineyard. So aromatically, it's probably not the greatest site, but structurally, it's like right up there, getting that kind of balance through the berries. So when we do bring that in, it's fermenting in old French barrels. And so, in a way, it's a little bit like unpasteurized cheese. We don't do anything to protect the freshness of it. So it's kind of about as natural as you can get. So yeah, it was definitely a different expression, and I think it's got a real following. And we don't put Sauvignon Blanc on the front of the label, because we don't want people buying that and expecting that, I guess, the more fruitful style. So we did identify that early as that could be an issue. And actually, I got an email once saying it was the worst Sauvignon Blanc we've ever had, and I said, maybe go and try this one. But I think a lot of people now look at it as more like a white wine rather than Sauvignon Blanc. But I think that's a great thing, because there's a lot of barrel fermented styles out of Marlborough doing great stuff, and so we're just showing another way that we can be using that variety. And to say, people often say, Marlborough's too reliant on Sauvignon Blanc, and I'm like, well, if that's the case, then Champagne's too reliant on Champagne. So for me, you just have to do it better. and you have to grow as a region and make better wine. And whether that's pushing boundaries or doing new things, or just taking what you're doing now and just getting better at it, and that's right from the viticulture right through to the market. I think that's the way forward. We don't need to be making everything for everyone. So Section was very much he's taken a punt, but people seem to like it. So that's good, yeah.
Unpasteurised cheese. I love that. And as for champagne being too reliant on champagne, he's got a point.
Yeah.
I mean, if you do something well and you can make it in different styles, then there's an argument you shouldn't be afraid to major on that. And on the basis of this tasting, it is clear that New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc has never been as exciting and diverse as it is now. So don't believe the wine snobs saying Sauvignon can't make proper wine, and ignore the paint-by-numbers cheapo wines out there. Check out the good stuff. It is seriously rewarding.
Okay, I think we should move on now to another white grape we love, and that's Chardonnay. And we should throw our tuppence into the pond here straight away by stating very clearly that Chardonnay is the most exciting grape variety in New Zealand right now. We love Kiwi Sauvignon. Look at your face. We love their Pinots. We love lots of grape varieties, but on current form, on the evidence of this tasting, the best New Zealand Chardonnays are world beaters. So much better value and more consistent than Burgundy right now. How about that?
Fighting talk. But yeah, this is such an exciting moment for Kiwi Chardonnay. Unbelievable quality and diversity starting to emerge too. Now, we touched on this in our Ahead of the Curve with New Zealand Chardonnay episode back in 2023, but this tasting was just further proof of how exciting these wines have become as a category. We've just tasted the Burgundy 2024 vintage, which is good for whites, but they're so expensive and hard to get hold of because quantities are consistently tiny. So the argument can rage, but I know which wines we're buying.
Indeed. And we're not the only ones saying this either. Greywacke won our top white award, as you said, with their stunning 2023 Chardonnay. Here's what Kevin Judd had to say.
I mean, the world of New Zealand Chardonnay is evolving still, and Hawke's Bay, I guess, is probably the most famous region for Chardonnay. They tend to make more of a sort of stone fruit style of Chardonnay. In Marlborough, we tend to make a more citrus-driven style of Chardonnay. We think Chardonnay in Marlborough is the sort of unsung hero, really. Everyone talks about Marlborough Sauvignon Blanc, and it has become like a household thing around the world, really. But and Chardonnay, frustratingly, lives in this sort of humongous shadow that is cast by Sauvignon Blanc. I mean, we're very proud to have Marlborough Sauvignon Blanc be so famous, but we do make other wines, and we personally think that Chardonnay in Marlborough has some fantastic potential.
And Matt Thompson's also a big fan of Chardonnay.
Chardonnay's exciting. I think there's some great examples. I think it's come so far. So the clones we have and the winemaking have totally changed. We now have some fantastic clones from Burgundy. They're more elegant. And I think winemaking, we're doing less and we're making it like Chardonnay rather than like Sauvignon. It's an exciting time. I think potentially Chardonnay is New Zealand's most promising grape right now.
And Matt says there's real diversity too. For example, his blank canvas Tanno is more of a Chablis style because it's a cooler site, so it gives a tenser, leaner style. Whereas his Reed Chardonnay is richer, more generous and flinty struck match, more in the kind of Meursault Pouligny style, as he described it. Lots of snap, crackle and pop, as well as structural oomph, as I would say it. And yeah, for someone as experienced as Matt to call Chardonnay the country's most promising grape, is quite the vote of confidence.
One final opinion on this from Ed Donaldson of the brilliant Pegasus Bay, based in North Canterbury, which won our Producer of the Year award.
New Zealand Chardonnay, I personally think, is one of the best value white wine bargains of the world. Currently, to get cool climate Chardonnay made of the kind of the level that some of the top producers are making it for the price, there's just nowhere else that comes close to that, in my opinion.
Strong words, but I think by and large we'd agree. certainly Pegasus Bay's Chardonnays are things of beauty. And absolutely they stack up in the global context. There's a reason there's so much of it in our cellar, isn't there?
Right, time for a brief pause before we come back for more.
Hello again, just us letting you know we've published a new subscriber-only bonus episode, and it's top draw.
Yeah, this is Hugh Johnson Uncut, the first in a series where we give centre stage to the very finest interviews we've done for the show over the years, free of the editing shears we normally have to apply. And this one's an absolute peach.
Yes, the legendary Hugh Johnson. The shorter version originally went out back in September 2020 as part of Season 1, which is now subscriber-only access. So to listen to this stellar interview, sign up to Wine Blast Plus. Just head to wineblast.co.uk or click the link in our show notes. Here are a couple of brief snippets from the show to whet your appetite.
If you look at the evidence, this country in the 18th century was drunk all the time. No wine is natural. I mean, it would be vinegar. Natural wine is vinegar, I suppose. I mean, we literally swallowed something that had been alive since before Shakespeare was born. Bottled history. Wow.
By way of brief recap so far, New Zealand has moved beyond one-trick Sauvignon Blanc to crafting increasingly complex, site-specific whites, including world-beating Chardonnay. And there's more on the menu too.
Indeed. So let's dive in with Pinot Noir, another Burgundian grape variety where New Zealand is excelling. Maybe the evolution hasn't been as frantic in recent years as with Chardonnay, but that's Pinot. It rewards slow, incremental, painstaking progress.
One of the New Zealand regions that's really set the pace with Pinot is Wairarapa, and particularly Martinborough in the North Island. It's where Ātarangi is based, one of the most celebrated Pinot producers in the country. So we asked long-term winemaker Helen Masters what the secret is to making great Pinot in her neck of the woods.
It's really understanding that Pinot Noir is really something that has to be micromanaged in a way. So we have about 80 small blocks of Pinot Noir we think of as really different entities, different parcels, different, and really try to coax the best out of each small block. So we have a lot of staff, we spend a lot of time in the vineyard, and to try to get the best out of each small block. I think Pinot, you can bring it all in and stick it all together and it starts to look all very similar. It can, so in terms of really trying to tease out what a certain site wants to express, I think you have to stand back a little bit and spend enough time on the ground too. I've been at Ātarangi for a long time, so I've seen a few vintages, so I think that helps. And I think just always being open to the idea that a site will change. Things do change with vine age, things do change with how the weather systems come into Martinborough. So it's looking for those changes and where they want to go, I think, in the winemaking.
How has your approach to Pinot Noir changed or evolved maybe over the years?
Yeah, it has evolved a lot. Some of that came out of, like natural winemaking, the whole idea of letting the wines be a little bit more expressive. But I think the idea that that a wine doesn't have to be big and powerful. I think that move away from trying to pack everything into a bottle. If you thought your site was a really good site and you wanted to put a big price tag on it, you almost felt like you had to throw oak at it. You had to have this powerful sort of presence for its value to be recognised. And I think that has changed subtly. There's still folk who love those big wines, but I think people are taking the time to understand the wines that are a little bit more, detailed and elegant. And I don't think it's excuse for having thin wines, but there's a a level of detail that can exist without it being necessarily driven by oak or really extracted tannins. And I think that's the exciting bit. It's making wines that probably dance a little bit more and a little bit more fun. Yeah.
Helen also defined the Martinborough Pinot style that she aims for as Pinots with a twist that keep you interested and guessing and coming back for another sip as the wine keeps revealing itself.
Yeah, love that. Now, something we flagged at the start, or I did with my very important stats, was, I'm just going to get the spreadsheet.
Here we go.
How exciting the central Otago region is for Pinot Noir. I'm not going to throw figures at you. I just wanted to make the point.
Don't throw anything
and
at
the
me.
winery that won our top red award was, don't know what that noise was, sorry, just excitement, banging the drum. It was Two Paddocks with their 2023 Pinot Noir. Two Paddocks is owned by part-time actor, full-time wine man, Sam Neill. I say that slightly tongue-in-cheek. But this is what he said when I asked him what's been the secret to his success with Pinot Noir.
Just learning what works where. The major changes we've made, I suppose, are taking out the clones that we're not terribly happy with, replacing them with ones that we are excited about. There's that. Just knowledge of what works where, and every square metre of land is different from the last. We've also, the major thing was turning to organics. And I realized 20 years ago that I didn't want to be using all these vile chemicals around my vines. So that's been quite a process. It also means a lot more work. That's the catch with organic farming. It meant more work, but it meant wine that we could also, wasn't just very good, but also we could sleep at night. Sleep is always a good thing. We want to leave the planet a better place, our little corner of the planet, a better place than we found it.
Now, Two Paddocks is based in Alexandra, a sub-region of central Otago with some of the most southerly vineyards in New Zealand. And they make a typically elegant style of Pinot, which is what we love about them, but still very complex. But it's interesting Sam mentions going organic as an important part of their success with Pinot Noir, because that emphasis on caring for the environment is a very common theme in Kiwi wine, isn't it?
Definitely. Certainly among the best producers. Time and again, you hear people talk about this. You know, for context, Sustainable Wine Growing New Zealand is one of the most successful schemes of its type in the world. It launched 30 years ago in 1995, and now 98% of the country's vineyards are certified. You know, sure, it might not be the most demanding certification in the world, but I think we both agree that New Zealand producers really do seem to be ahead of the curve, the global curve in this regard.
Yeah, I mean, it's true. It really is a theme that keeps coming up when you talk to producers. And of course, sustainability is so much more than organics. Just thinking about it, you know, some tastings you do, there are so many wines in heavy bottles.
Yeah.
And of course, bottles and packaging are usually the biggest contributors to a winery's carbon footprint. Now, in our tasting, we were, of course, looking out for this, and there were actually only a couple of really heavy bottles, which is a good sign.
Yeah, it's a good sign. You know, it's not so good for those people who do have the heavy bottles, but, you know, absolutely as a general comment. And, you know, there's so many stories we could get into here. For example, you know, Dog Point with its 25,000 native plants and increasing, being the largest organic vineyard in New Zealand now, reducing bottle weights, planning to be carbon zero on the wine front without offsets by 2032, that kind of thing. But we're going to keep moving because we need to finish off on Pinot Noir. We've talked Wairarapa and Central Otago. Waipara and North Canterbury more generally are also great areas for Pinot. But here's Kevin Judd on his pitch for Marlborough.
So Marlborough Pinot Noir has really gone through a huge evolution. In the very early days of Marlborough, the clones that were planted were more suitable for sparkling wine production than for red wine production. And when in the Cloudy Bay days, when we first started experimenting with Pinot Noir, we were using Swiss clones that were quite light in colour, light in structure, and it was a little bit hit and miss for a while. But once we realised that we really needed better clonal material, we really needed a better place to grow it, and ultimately we discovered we did get the better clones. And I'm not just talking about Cloudy Bay, I'm talking about Marlborough in general. We got the better clones into Marlborough, the Dijon clones. We discovered that the southern valleys, the clay hillsides around the southern valleys, gave us a much better terroir, a much better soil to grow Pinot Noir. Once we started heading in that direction, there really was a huge improvement in Marlborough Pinot. And then now that we've got some vine age, I think Marlborough Pinot has really stand up to anything else in New Zealand. Marlborough Pinot Noir is really coming of age.
Southern valleys, and actually Awatiri too, are looking particularly good in that regard.
Yeah.
Totally agree.
Yeah.
And of course, it's not just about Pinot or Chardonnay or Sauvignon. There are a fair few other varieties looking promising in New Zealand. You know, the likes of Albarino and Pinot Gris, Grüne Veltliner, Sauvignon Blanc, Syrah, and of course, Riesling can be superb across a range of styles. And we definitely point to Pegasus Bay as making a range of brilliant Rieslings.
Yeah. These are bravura Rieslings. Ed Donaldson explains that the cool conditions and low yields in their Waipara vineyards give naturally intense styles that are left to hang on the vine for a long, slow build-up of flavour. And it's a style that's evolved over time, as he says.
I would say our Pegasus Bay House style is probably just everything is kind of dialed up a bit.
And what do you mean by dialed up?
Dialed up, I guess, we have a lot of flavour in our wines, and a lot of that has to do with that longer hang time. For the Rieslings, the flavour's really dialed up again through that long hang time. I mean, we pick our Rieslings much later than most people, so they're packed full of flavour. They are dialed up in terms of... they're balanced with really good levels of acidity. There's a phenolic component to our Rieslings as well, which add a little bit of structure there, and the alcohols are they're not shy either. We think that they're all very much in balance. But as I think everything is kind of dialed up to some extent.
How have your wines evolved over the years?
So I mean, stylistically, I think we've changed quite considerably. When we first started making wine, we were probably like most people in New Zealand modelling them on the old world. The Rieslings were modelled on the Mosel, the Pinots and the Chardonnays were modelled on Burgundy, the red Bordeaux varietals were of course modelled on Bordeaux, etc. And as time's gone on, we've seen the vines have got older. We've seen the wines age. We've done a huge amount of experimentation because we don't really have any kind of strict appellation system. So we do have a lot of free run for experimenting, and which we do still today a lot of. I think we've become much more confident in making the sorts of wines that we really believe in now. That we've come to the conclusion that we're not in Europe. We're actually on the other side of the world, and there's a lot that's different about our particular vineyard site. So why not celebrate that? There's only one place in the world that's Waipara in North Canterbury, and so why not make the wines that really speak of that? Example might be for the Riesling. We started making these, sort of Cabernet Spatlays are kind of versions of Riesling, but as we've found over time, the longer we leave the fruit to hang out, the more of this really zesty orange peely character, which we really love. And so we've sort of pushed those harvest dates out, and then we've been actually fermenting them a bit drier because our tastes have changed, and we just think they make better wines that way. So the Rieslings have become much bigger, richer, fuller wines as a result of doing that. We got into wine for making good wine that we believe in. We didn't get into wine for any other reason. So, sort of standing true to kind of what we believe in is something that we it's important to us.
Sounds almost like a religious crusade, but definitely one I'd enthusiastically join in on.
Okay.
And Ed touches on a key theme as to why Kiwi wine is so exciting right now. They've looked around the world. They're not scared to experiment. And now they're working out how their wines can be unique.
Yeah.
And they're championing that.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, we love Pegasus Bay's Rieslings across a range of styles. 2 of them feature in our Wines of the Year. Do check those out. They also do library releases, which can be glorious too. But one other variety that Ed flagged up as working well in New Zealand was Sauvignon Blanc, wasn't it?
Yeah, just quickly on this one before we move on. We've been really pleasantly surprised by a couple of Kiwi Chenin's lately. And then in our tasting, we tried one from Ottaurangi that absolutely knocked our socks off. Stunning. It won our Discovery White Award. Incredibly, it's the first one that Helen Masters has made. She describes Chenin as an amazing grape variety that's hugely underrepresented in New Zealand, overshadowed perhaps by Sauvignon. And here's what she said about its potential there.
I think that the possibility with it is endless. You know, who doesn't like, you know, what South Africa's doing with Chenin? I just think, you know, they've really owned it, and it's great to see it. And I think, though, with our cooler climate here, we've got the ability to so much acidity that it can go through Malo and still have amazing vibrancy of acidity. And for me, that's exciting when there's a variety that you can basically leave in a barrel for a year. It does what it wants, and you're not trying to direct the style in any way, and it makes an amazing wine. I think that tells you that it's a good match, I think. So hopefully more people will plant it.
Now, we could carry on looking at cool grape varieties till the cows come home, but time is marching on, and we did want to talk about a couple of bigger picture themes, didn't we? Particularly one of the elephants in the room, which is price.
You can take the girl out of Yorkshire. This is a key issue because New Zealand wine doesn't come cheap. I think we can all agree on that. You know, just by way of evidence of that. In the UK, we've got a stat here.
Stat alert.
Spreadsheet back out. In 2025, the average retail price for a bottle of New Zealand wine was £8.05 versus the figure for the wider wine category, which is £6.80. So New Zealand wine has a nearly 20% price premium. So yeah, it often gets flack for being pricey, and that's fair enough, you know, especially if you're struggling with the cost of living, or, you know, you're based in a high tax or high tariff country. But there are reasons for this, aren't there?
Yeah, I mean, as we've said, New Zealand's production is tiny in global terms, so they don't generally have the economies of scale of bigger producers. Plus, as Helen Masters reminded us, New Zealand is an expensive place to live, you know, to buy things and do business. The wages there are some of the highest in the world in comparative terms. It can also be pretty work-intensive viticulture given the weather they have. And they also put a value on being sustainable, both environmentally and commercially. And so with all that, it's just not easy being profitable.
Yeah. Sam Neill jokes he's glad he's got a second job, which we've detailed.
Probably quite a well-paid second job.
Yeah, and if he wanted to make money, he'd have gone into tequila or gin, you know, do a George Clooney, that kind of thing. But, you know, it's not exactly as if Kiwi producers are rolling in it, is it?
No.
You know, the upshot is that, yes, Kiwi wine isn't cheap, that's true. But what we'd argue is that New Zealand wine can and does offer excellent value in a global context.
I mean, when you start comparing it to, for example, Burgundy or Oregon, suddenly Kiwi Pinot Noir and Chardonnay have a real price advantage. You know, or Sauvignon Blanc versus Sancerre and Puy-Fumé, or the best Syrahs versus Northern Rhone. And you can expand this comparison further. So it's not actually about being the cheapest, it's about delivering value and satisfaction for the price in a global wine context. And I'd say Kiwi wine absolutely does that.
Yeah, which is, you know, why we also give some best value awards in our report. You know, check those out. Helen Masters of Ottaurangi talked about the fact that good New Zealand wine has integrity. One other person who talked about integrity and authenticity was Dog Point's Matt Sutherland.
Ever since we started, the key messages I got was we want to be regionally distinctive with a point of difference. Don't stuff it up, be reachable for people. You know, we want to make quality wines, but we want people to be able to buy them. So we don't actually have a huge interest in making wine that is going to be very hard for people to purchase. You know, we have to make wine that's relevant to the viticulture that we're applying and the costs of of doing business, but we still want people to be able to grab that glass and enjoy it. And so you talk about integrity, it's the whole thing.
So we're not talking about producers trying to be greedy with crazy prices, but equally, we're not talking bargain basement levels. Here's what Ed Donaldson had to say about this.
Well, I guess I would challenge you to grab some of the best examples of New Zealand wine, whether it be Riesling, Pinot Noir, Chardonnay, and just compare it against something similar from the old world, similar cost-wise from the old world, and have a look and see what you think.
So you think value for money, pound, hitting weight, pound for pound, New Zealand really can outcompete some maybe more famous regions in the old world when it comes to in the fine wine context?
Without hopefully sounding arrogant, yes, I definitely do. Yeah. I still think the very best examples largely do come from those regions, but I think New Zealand's not far away, and I think when you put the money to next to the bottles, then you might be surprised at the level of quality you'll get in the glass.
And of course, one other thing you notice about all these fine wines from New Zealand, especially when you do a big tasting of them, reds and whites, is that they're almost all sealed with screw cap. We would absolutely endorse this. In our experience, it just works well for the wines. They're more consistent, they age better, and they're easier to get into. Yeah,
well, for that reason and many more, we're big fans of screw caps. Obviously, mining aluminium comes with an environmental impact, and there's still a place for cork, but screw caps, in theory, can also be endlessly recycled, and they bring spoilage rates right down, which in itself has an environmental impact. One interesting case study here is Dog Point. They started bottling their straight Sauvignon in screw cap in 2004, but had their other wines, so Section 94, Chardonnay and Pinot, under cork. When they'd been going 10 years, they opened up every single wine they'd ever made and tasted them. Here's Matt Sutherland.
So we went back, tried everything, and the most consistent was the Sauvignon. And what was happening, it wasn't necessarily cork take, but the wines were getting a little bit scalped from, sometimes a bit dull. And I think if you weren't having them side by side or you didn't have them all the time, you may not pick it up, but we picked it up. And it's just quite frustrating when you're doing all this work and you're getting it to the market and that little thing just lets you down. So for us, that was a bit of an eye-opener. And so from that point, we started to look at that change. I mean, we still love a cork. Everyone loves pulling out a cork, but the wine quality has got to come first. And the style of wines that we're making, screw cap absolutely suits it. And I think the aging potential is going to be better. It's going to be more consistent. We can only go back to what we've done, but already you can see the signs of the evolution and retaining that freshness across, and not getting that discrepancy between bottles. But we've never really looked back.
Matt also tells a funny story where he and his sister Anna, the younger generation at Dog Point, as it were, had to wait until their parents had gone away, at which point they quickly changed to screw cap. And then it was all done and too late to change back. A winery coup, as it were.
A coup. Brilliant, love that. And, given they now offer late releases of the wines with bottle age, which I can attest make for delicious drinking, it was a fun tasting. The screw caps should come even more into their own. Right, we should start to wrap things up. Any final points before we head into conclusions?
Oh, God, there are so many things that bubble around in your head after doing a tasting like this, immersing yourself in quality New Zealand wine. But I guess on that note, I actually would just like very briefly to put in a plea for fizz. I'd love to see more quality traditional method sparkling wine from New Zealand. It can be delicious. All the raw ingredients are there, and it would make a very solid basis for a profitable industry moving forwards. It just needs more momentum.
Yeah, we had some delicious fizz in our tasting, didn't we? I mean, the number one family estate took off the top sparkling award, and there were a couple of other lovely wines. I guess the challenge is that Sauvignon Blanc you can sell quickly and profitably, whereas traditional method fizz you have to age and it ties up capital and stock, and it isn't as immediately profitable. But I totally agree. Looking to the long term, this could be a really strong way of broadening New Zealand's appeal.
Okay, so let's start to wrap things up properly. Here's Matt Thompson with some final words.
Look, it's tough times for not just New Zealand wine, but the whole industry. But I think we're seeing a change occurring now. I think there's been almost a rush to commoditise New Zealand wine, to sell it on price, and there's been a thought that it's very similar, which for us is incredibly frustrating because the diversity is huge. And Appellation Marble Wine, I think, is championing that diversity, and we're very proud members of that. So I think we're seeing a growing up phase, I think.
New Zealand growing up, absolutely. We'd agree with that. I mentioned Kiwi wine being at a crossroads, but it's exciting to see that process up close of a country maturing, hitting its wine straps, and to taste the results.
And just to pick up on what Matt mentioned about Appellation Marlborough wine, we did do an episode on this a short while back, but just briefly, this is a voluntary association where producers get to use a logo on their bottles if they follow certain quality criteria, like only using 100% Marlborough grown grapes from sustainable certified vineyards, bottling in New Zealand, achieving minimum ripeness levels, and wines being tasted and certified by a panel of independent experts.
Yeah, obviously this has echoes of Europe's Appellation Contrôlée system or equivalents. But we're starting to see this kind of voluntary producer association outside Europe too, in an attempt to sort of guarantee authenticity and integrity, but without stifling innovation. Here's Sam Neill.
I think we've made such extraordinary progress in the last 30, 40 years. And I put that down to two things. One is that we're sensible enough to learn from the best. So young people are always going to great places in the world to learn how everyone else does it. But the other thing, of course, is that it's one thing growing it in France, and I'm an enormous fan of Burgundy. Obviously, this is where this enthusiasm started for me. They're also very restricted because they have Appellation Contrôlée everywhere you go. Rather sinister phrase, as far as I'm concerned. We don't have any Appellation Contrôlée. So we are able to innovate at the same time. So that combination of history, of tradition, along with let's try something, that idea, I think, has burgeoned in New Zealand. So people have, particularly in the UK, are very familiar with Marlborough wines. What's it called again? Sauvignon Blanc. Sauvignon Blanc, which has been a great calling card for New Zealand, because it's widely drunk and easily drunk and all that sort of thing. But now the world is discovering what else we do. And Pinot Noir, I think, is probably number 2 exports from New Zealand. It's number 2. And again, it's freakish because, as I say, it's very hard to find places where you can grow this great wine successfully. So we're very lucky in that respect.
I think it's in that fine balance of not being scared to be innovative and ambitious, but then also learn from the best and then chart your own way. That's what's interesting about New Zealand wine right now, and that's why it's exciting.
Yeah, here are some final thoughts from Matt Sutherland.
We don't have a world domination plan. We're just we want to keep making more wines and doing that better. If anything, I don't have much plans to be much bigger than we are now, So I think we also want to keep getting better at what we're doing and how we communicate that. And, we're not trying to reinvent the wheel. We're just trying to be true to our place and show that through the wines.
And to finish off, some words from our producer of the year, Ed Donaldson, on behalf of Pegasus Bay.
New Zealand is time is kind of it's matured a lot, in the last 10, 15 plus years, and I think New Zealand's really found its feet with the premium producers, and really found a place that those producers have a level of confidence to make the sorts of wines that they really believe in, and I think for that you're getting really you're getting authenticity that you might not have otherwise thought of when you thought of New Zealand.
Do you think there's still quite a way to go? Do you think there's still more things to discover in New Zealand that will make it even more diverse and even more exciting?
Absolutely, yeah, 100%. There's different varieties. There's some great examples of Chenin Blanc starting to come out of New Zealand, of Cabernet Franc, Albarino. There's no doubt regions in New Zealand that have yet to be discovered, as well.
So more to come in the future as well. There's a thought. Right, time to bring things to a close. Do you fancy summing up for us?
Absolutely. Okay. New Zealand is a wine country that's grown up at breakneck speed and is now at a critical stage in its vinous evolution. There are understandable concerns over the way Sauvignon Blanc dominates production and exports. In short, how the narrative around Kiwi wine is faltering. But look closer and you see a vibrant, dynamic wine scene where Chardonnay is emerging as a potential world beater, Sauvignon Blanc is becoming ever more complex and rewarding, Pinot Noir continues to thrill, and more stars are emerging from the wings. While the wines don't come cheap, they can and do offer real value in a global context based on sustainable, authentic winemaking values. And there's more to come.
Yeah, thanks to New Zealand Winegrowers and all the producers for supporting our Wines of the Year initiative. Thanks also to our fabulous interviewees, Helen Masters, Matt Thompson, Kevin Judd, Ed Donaldson, Matt Sutherland and Sam Neill. We'll be airing the Sam Neill interview in full for our lucky Wine Blast Plus subscribers, so do look out for that. Remember, you can find the full Wines of the Year report free to download on our website with loads more content. Thank you for listening, and until next time, cheers.